started with whispers. Ethan Winters had grown used to them over the years. They followed him through the hallways of East Ridge High like a second shadow, impossible to escape. People didn't talk to Ethan, they talked about him. Did you see his shoes? They're falling apart. Does he even own a comb? Creepy. He's always staring at his desk like it's about to give him answers. It wasn't just the whispers, though. The laughter stung worse. Ethan wasn't the type to stand out. He wasn't good-looking or athletic or even particularly smart. He was small for his age, with messy brown hair and a slight frame that made him look like he belonged in middle school. His clothes were always too big, hand-me-downs from thrift stores that smelled faintly of mothballs. But it was his silence that drew the most attention. Ethan never spoke unless he had to. Even when the teachers called on him, he'd mumble his answers, his voice barely audible. That silence made him a target. To Travis Keller, the self-proclaimed king of East Ridge High, Ethan was an easy mark. Travis didn't just bully Ethan, he tormented him. It started with name-calling, the kind of juvenile insults Ethan could almost ignore. Winters the weakling. Silent freak. Poor boy Winters. But as the months went by, it escalated. It wasn't just words anymore. Travis and his friends would shove Ethan into lockers, trip him in the hallways, and accidentally spill drinks on him during lunch. Once, they locked him in the janitor's closet during gym class, leaving him there until the janitor found him after school. Ethan didn't fight back. What was the point? He'd tried once in the 9th grade. He'd told the principal about the relentless bullying, the stolen lunches, the cruel pranks. But Travis had a way of talking his way out of trouble. "He's lying," Travis had said, his expression one of mock innocence. The principal believed him. They always did. By the time senior year rolled around, Ethan had learned to keep his head down. He avoided eye contact, skipped pep rallies, and took the long way to class to avoid the cafeteria. But no matter how much he tried to disappear, Travis always found him. The breaking point came at a party. Ethan didn't want to go. He hated parties, the noise, the crowds, the way people pretended to like each other for a few hours. But Mark had convinced him. Mark was the only person Ethan could call a friend, though even that felt like a stretch. Mark was nice enough, but he didn't understand what it was like to be Ethan. "Just come for an hour," Mark had said. "No one's going to bother you." It didn't take long for Travis to prove him wrong. The party was in full swing by the time Ethan arrived. Loud music blasted from the speakers, and the air smelled like cheap beer and sweat. Ethan stayed near the back of the room, nursing a soda and hoping no one would notice him. But Travis always noticed. "Winters!" Travis shouted, his voice cutting through the music. Ethan's stomach sank as Travis pushed through the crowd, his grin wide and menacing. "What are you doing here, man? This isn't your scene." Ethan tried to walk away, but Travis grabbed his arm, pulling him into the center of the room. "Let's make him feel welcome," Travis called out, laughing as the crowd cheered. Before Ethan could react, they dumped a bucket of something over his head. It was cold and sticky, the smell of stale beer and soda filling his nostrils. The room erupted in laughter as Ethan stood there, dripping with the foul mixture. He could feel their eyes on him, their laughter cutting deeper than any words ever could. He ran out of the house, the sound of their mocking cheers echoing in his ears. That night, something inside him snapped. He sat in his room for hours, staring at his reflection in the mirror. His hair was still damp, and his clothes reeked of beer. But it wasn't the humiliation that consumed him. It was the anger. Ethan didn't cry. He didn't scream or throw things. He just sat there, his hands clenched into fists, and thought about everything they'd done to him. Every insult, every shove, every laugh at his expense. He thought about Travis with his perfect smile and his effortless charm, the way he could do no wrong in the eyes of the teachers. And he thought about the others, the ones who stood by and watched, laughing along with Travis or pretending not to see. They were just as guilty. Ethan didn't sleep that night. By morning, he had made a decision. He wasn't going to be their victim anymore. The students at East Ridge High didn't know it yet, but the quiet boy they had tormented for years was gone. In his place was someone new, someone who wasn't afraid to fight back. And he was just getting started. Ethan's revenge didn't start with fireworks. It began quietly, like a shadow slipping into a room. But shadows have a way of growing darker. And Ethan's would soon consume everything around him. Travis Keller's mornings were a routine. Every day before class, he stopped by the vending machine outside the cafeteria to grab his usual energy drink. Ethan knew this. He had been watching. That Monday, Travis found the first note inside the machine. "I know what you did." Travis crumpled it, tossing it into the trash. But the tension in his jaw and the way his eyes darted around the hallway betrayed him. The second note came that evening. When Travis walked to his car after football practice, the windshield was covered with dirt and scratches. He grumbled, grabbing a water bottle to wipe it clean. And then he saw the message. Carved into the glass, deep enough to leave grooves, were the words, "You can't hide." That night, Travis didn't sleep well. Every creak of his house felt louder. Every shadow seemed to move. By the time morning came, his nerves were already shot. But Ethan was just getting started. The video. Friday night was the school's biggest football game of the season. The stands were packed, the air filled with cheers and the smell of popcorn. Ethan had been planning for weeks. Just before halftime, the scoreboard flickered. At first, the crowd thought it was a glitch. But then the image appeared. It was grainy, but clear enough to recognize the scene. Travis, in the school hallway, slamming Ethan into a locker. The sound wasn't right. Distorted and sharp, like static mixed with laughter. The video looped, showing the same moment over and over. But it didn't stop there. The next clip showed Travis in the cafeteria, throwing Ethan's lunch on the ground. Then another of him and his friends shoving Ethan down the stairs. The footage was raw, shaky, like someone had been following them for years, recording every cruel act. The crowd went silent. And then the laughter started. It wasn't from the students. It was coming from the speakers, loud, distorted laughter that echoed across the field. The sound grew louder, more twisted, until the screen suddenly went black. The silence that followed was suffocating. Travis stood frozen on the field, his face pale. The game continued, but everyone was distracted. By Monday, Travis was a joke. Memes of the video spread like wildfire, and even his friends began avoiding him. But the worst was yet to come. The Night Stalker. Travis tried to brush it off, acting like the notes and the video didn't bother him. But Ethan could see through him. He wasn't done. Not yet. That Wednesday night, Travis was walking home from a friend's house. The streets were empty, the lamps casting long shadows across the pavement. Travis shoved his hands into his pockets, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling creeping up his spine. He told himself he was imagining things, until he heard it. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate, and just far enough behind him to keep him guessing. Travis stopped, spinning around. The street was empty, but the footsteps continued. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice cracking. Silence. He quickened his pace, his breath visible in the cold air. But the sound of footsteps grew louder, closer. He broke into a run, his heart pounding as he rounded the corner to his street. The porch light of his house was in sight when something darted across the sidewalk in front of him. A shadow, tall, thin, and impossibly fast. Travis stumbled, nearly falling as he scrambled up the steps to his front door. Once inside, he locked the door and turned on every light. His hands were shaking as he reached for his phone to call his friends. But when he picked it up, the screen was cracked. And etched into the glass was another message. "You'll never be safe." The next morning, Travis barely made it to school. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by bloodshot eyes and a trembling hand that gripped his backpack strap like a lifeline. When he opened his locker, he froze. Inside was a single, small object. A photograph. It was a picture of him, taken the night before, sprinting toward his house. The angle was low, like someone had been crouching in the shadows. Travis turned, his eyes scanning the hallway, but no one was watching him, or at least no one he could see. When the bell rang, Travis bolted to the parking lot. He couldn't stay there any longer. But as he reached his car, he saw it. A single red handprint, smeared across the hood. He wiped it away with his sleeve, but the stain didn't come off. And when he looked up, he saw Ethan standing at the edge of the lot, his expression blank, his hands in his pockets. For the first time, Travis felt real fear, because Ethan wasn't hiding anymore. Travis thought he had hit rock bottom. But Ethan's revenge was just beginning, because when you push someone too far, they don't just push back. They pull you down with them. The sound of Travis's own heartbeat was deafening as he walked through the deserted parking lot. It was late, too late for anyone to still be around, but he had stayed after practice to talk to Coach. The streetlights buzzed faintly overhead, casting flickering shadows that made Travis glance over his shoulder every few steps. He told himself he was imagining things, but he wasn't. As he approached his car, he froze. The windshield was covered in deep, jagged scratches, as though someone had dragged a blade across the glass over and over. His breath fogged in the cold air as he stepped closer, his eyes narrowing to make out the words etched into the surface. "You took everything." Travis swallowed hard, the words sending a chill down his spine. Before he could react, something caught his eye. On the driver's seat, illuminated by the faint glow of the overhead light, was a bundle wrapped in tattered fabric. He unlocked the door cautiously, his pulse pounding, and unwrapped the bundle with trembling hands. Inside was one of his football jerseys, ripped to shreds, stained dark with what looked like blood. The smell hit him next, metallic, rotting. He gagged, dropping the fabric as he stumbled back, his knees hitting the cold pavement. Ethan was watching, from the shadows behind the lot, his breath steady and his hands cold. He felt nothing as Travis staggered away from his car, scanning the empty lot for help that wasn't coming. This wasn't just about fear anymore. Ethan wanted him to suffer. The following night, Travis woke to the sound of something sharp scraping against his bedroom window. His room was dark, the faint light from the street outside casting long, crooked shadows on the walls. He reached for his phone, his hands trembling as he turned on the flashlight. There, pressed against the glass, was a handprint. But it wasn't a normal handprint. The fingers were long and thin, the smudges dark and sticky, leaving streaks as they slid downward. It didn't make sense. His bedroom was on the second floor. He grabbed a baseball bat from under his bed and crept to the window, his heart hammering in his chest. He yanked the curtains aside, ready to swing, but there was nothing there. Just the handprint already beginning to drip. Travis didn't sleep that night. By morning, he was running on fumes, the exhaustion etched into his face as he arrived at school. His friends barely recognized him, but no one dared to ask what was wrong. Travis Keller, the untouchable king of East Ridge High, looked like he had seen a ghost. But Ethan wasn't done. After school, as Travis walked to his car, he noticed something on the ground just behind his rear tire. Pair of shoes. They were his, but they had been destroyed, cut, slashed, and smeared with mud. Nestled inside one of the shoes was a Polaroid photograph. The image was dark and grainy, but Travis could make out his own bedroom window. The photo had been taken from the outside, the angle looking directly into his room. In the corner of the window, barely visible, was the faint outline of a face. Travis's hands shook as he crumpled the photo, shoving it into his pocket as he climbed into the car and locked the doors. He didn't drive home. He couldn't. Instead, he parked at the far edge of a deserted lot, his head resting against the steering wheel as he tried to catch his breath. But the quiet didn't last long. A loud thud jolted him upright, came from the trunk. His breath hitched as he stared at the rearview mirror, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. The sound came again, louder this time, more deliberate. Something was moving in the trunk. He grabbed the bat from the back seat, his legs shaky as he stepped out of the car. The air was cold, his breath visible as he approached the trunk. He hesitated for a moment, his fingers hovering over the latch, before finally pulling it open. Inside was another bundle, larger this time. The smell hit him first, rotting, wet, and sharp. He covered his mouth with his sleeve, gagging as he reached for the fabric. When he pulled it back, his stomach dropped. Inside was the carcass of a small animal, a raccoon, its fur matted with blood, its eyes wide and lifeless. But that wasn't what made him stagger back. Pinned to its chest was another photograph. This one was of Travis. Sleeping, he vomited onto the pavement, his body shaking violently as he backed away from the car. His vision blurred, his head spinning as he tried to process what he had just seen. He didn't see Ethan watching from the treeline, his expression calm, his hands still smeared with blood. That night, Travis left the lights on in every room of his house. He locked the doors, checked the windows, and sat in the living room with the bat across his lap. But no amount of light could chase away the feeling that he wasn't alone. At 3 a.m., the power went out. The house plunged into darkness, the hum of the refrigerator and the buzz of the lights replaced by deafening silence. And then the footsteps started. Slow, deliberate, coming from upstairs. Travis sat frozen, gripping the bat so tightly his fingers went numb. The footsteps moved down the hallway, pausing just above him. And then, slowly, they descended the stairs, one step at a time. By the time the police arrived, Travis was gone. The officers found the bat lying on the floor, the front door still locked from the inside. And on the living room wall, written in dark, dripping letters, were the words, "Now you know how it feels." The news of Travis Keller's disappearance spread through East Ridge High like wildfire. By the time Monday rolled around, the school halls were filled with whispers. No one knew where he had gone or what had happened, but everyone agreed on one thing. He didn't leave on his own. Ethan sat quietly in the back of the classroom, his eyes fixed on the desk in front of him. He listened to the murmurs, the speculation, the fear creeping into every corner of the school. And for the first time in years, he felt like he was in control. But he wasn't done. Travis had been the ringleader, but he wasn't the only one who deserved to pay. Ethan had a list, and next on it was Haley McBride. Haley wasn't cruel in the same way Travis was. She didn't shove Ethan into lockers or dump his lunch tray on the floor, but she laughed. Every time Travis humiliated him, every time Ethan was the butt of a joke, Haley was there, laughing louder than anyone else. And in Ethan's mind, that made her just as guilty. That night, Haley stayed late at school for cheerleading practice. By the time she left, the parking lot was nearly empty, the floodlights casting long shadows across the asphalt. She fished her keys out of her bag, humming softly to herself as she approached her car. But when she reached it, she stopped. The driver's side door was open. Haley frowned, glancing around the lot. "Hello?" she called, her voice echoing in the silence. No answer. She peeked inside the car, her heart pounding. Everything looked normal, her gym bag on the passenger seat, her water bottle in the cup holder. But something felt wrong. When she slid into the driver's seat, she noticed it. A piece of paper, tucked under the windshield wiper. She opened the door, reaching out to grab it, her hands trembling. The note was scrawled in bold, uneven letters. "I know you laughed." Haley's breath caught in her throat. She crumpled the note, throwing it onto the floor of the car as she started the engine. The headlights flickered on, illuminating the empty lot. But just as she pulled out, something moved in the corner of her eye. A figure, standing in the shadows, watching her. She slammed on the gas, her tires screeching as she sped out of the lot. By the time she reached her house, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely turn the key in the lock. She bolted the door behind her, checking every window and turning on every light. But no matter how safe she tried to feel, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. Around midnight, the knocking started. It was soft at first, a faint tap against the front door. Haley froze, her eyes darting to the clock. 12:03 a.m. She grabbed her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen, but she didn't dial. Not yet. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. She stood, her legs trembling as she crept toward the door. "Who's there?" she called, her voice shaking. The knocking stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. And then she heard it, a soft, muffled laugh. It was low and guttural, the sound sending chills down her spine. Haley backed away from the door, her heart racing as she grabbed her phone and dialed 911. The operator answered, her voice calm and steady. "There's someone outside my house," Haley whispered. "Stay on the line," the operator said. "Officers are on their way." But before they could arrive, the power went out. The house plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the faint glow of Haley's phone screen. She moved toward the kitchen, fumbling for the flashlight she kept in the drawer. When she turned it on, the beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the room. And that's when she saw it. The back door was open, the glass shattered, and on the floor, smeared in blood, were the words, "I laughed too." Haley screamed, dropping the flashlight as she ran for the front door. But as she reached for the handle, a hand clamped over her mouth, pulling her back into the darkness. The last thing she saw was the faint glow of headlights outside as the police arrived. When the officers entered the house, they found no sign of Haley. The kitchen was in disarray, the back door swinging open in the wind. But on the fridge, written in dark, dripping letters, was another message. "She's with me now." The students at East Ridge High thought Travis's disappearance was a fluke, but now they knew the truth. Someone was targeting them, and whoever it was, they weren't stopping anytime soon. The morning after Haley's disappearance, East Ridge High was in chaos. Police officers swarmed the halls, questioning students and staff, while parents flooded the principal's office demanding answers. 2 students missing within a week, both prominent, both connected. The connection wasn't lost on Ethan. He watched from the back of the cafeteria as officers pulled Travis's closest friends aside for questioning. Their faces were pale, their voices hushed. But no one was looking at Ethan. No one ever did. Haley's parents didn't sit quietly. They plastered the town with flyers, knocked on doors, and pleaded with the community to come forward with any information. The police launched search parties, combing the woods and alleys, but they found nothing. No footprints, no clothing, no clues, except for the bloodied words smeared on her fridge. "She's with me now." The pressure mounted, and the tension in the school grew unbearable. Students whispered about curses, conspiracies, and secret grudges. Some even speculated that Travis and Haley had run away together, though their closest friends denied it. Only Ethan knew the truth, and it wasn't over. That Friday, the school hosted a mandatory assembly in the gymnasium. The principal, a stern woman with a trembling voice, stood at the podium, urging students to stay vigilant and report anything unusual. But as she spoke, the lights in the gym flickered. Just once. A faint buzz rippled through the crowd, but she continued. Then the projector screen behind her blinked to life. The students froze as an image appeared on the screen. It was grainy, but unmistakable. Haley, standing in her cheer uniform, her face streaked with fear. She was in a dark room, her hands tied in front of her, her mouth gagged. The room erupted into chaos. Students screamed, teachers rushed toward the podium, and the principal yelled for someone to cut the power. But before they could, the image changed. This time it was a video. The camera panned slowly across a dimly lit space. A basement, judging by the concrete walls and exposed pipes. The beam of light settled on 2 chairs. In one sat Travis, his head slumped forward, his body battered and bruised. In the other sat Haley, her eyes wide with terror. The video cut out abruptly, leaving the gym in stunned silence. Ethan sat in the back row, his face expressionless, his hands resting calmly on his knees. He could feel the weight of the room shifting, the fear thick enough to choke on. But no one looked at him. The police traced the video feed to a local server, but by the time they arrived at the basement shown in the footage, it was empty. The chairs were gone, the walls scrubbed clean. But in the center of the floor, carved into the concrete, was a single word: watch. That night, Ethan burned the last of his notes. The small pile of photographs and newspaper clippings smoldered in the rusted barrel behind his house, the flames casting long shadows across his face. He watched the papers curl and blacken, his chest rising and falling with measured breaths. The town wouldn't forget Travis or Haley. The search for them would go on for months, maybe years. But Ethan didn't care. He had made his point. They weren't laughing anymore. Months later, a new student arrived at East Ridge High. He was quiet, kept to himself, and didn't stand out much. But when he walked down the hallways, the whispers started again. And in the corner of the cafeteria, Ethan watched him with a faint smile. It always starts with whispers.